Welcome back, Kathy,
Thank you.
for the third in our series on breathing and how it relates to how we individually process our grief and all of the sort of side effects of that. Today, I'd like to talk about one of the more common issues that people encounter when they're in grief, and that's anxiety. There's a sort of general feeling that of uncertainty or fear that ties back into our earlier conversations about fight or flight and how that impacts our breathing. But let's talk, if you would, share some information about what happens when we encounter anxiety. What do our bodies go through? And then perhaps we can wrap up with how we might counter that with proper breathing.
Okay. So anxiety is fairly complicated, and it's a way to try to control. We're in a position of not being in very good control when we're under such an acute process in grief. We don't have any control over much of anything at all.
Right.
It's tough. And so when we are in that position, our mind can spin around. It can cause all kinds of random thoughts or spinning thoughts that keep on going. It causes us to want to be isolated from other people. It doesn't let us eat. It doesn't let us sleep. And it seems to be an outside source that's really kind of controlling us outside of our own work. What happens on the inside is that everything is trying to do things to help protect. Everything is trying to protect. All the cranial nerves are trying to kind of come in and sync, and it sees danger and is trying to work through it.
Right.
So what happens with anxiety over time is that as the gut is being less useful to the body, you can be overeating in the chronic stages, but most people, they just can't eat. They're just not able to. And so what we learned over time is that things that are called neurotransmitters, things like serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, epinephrine, are all now known to be housed in the gut. They're housed in the GI system. And those things that we thought were in the brain that give us the different behaviors are actually in the GI system.
Very interesting, because I guess the way we react to all of those or the way we become aware of how they impact us is the effect on our brains.
And that seemed logical back in the day, I think. And we, when medicine took the psychiatry part of the head and put it over here and the body over there.
Yeah.
But as we put that blend back together as a whole human being, we find that it's very much a communication issue. And so what happens with the gut not working very well under the anxiety associated with the vagal nerve is that these neurotransmitters are on fire. So we get super anxious because our serotonin isn't really going to our brain. It's just not helping us soothe our world. It's not getting us to be able to process very well. And dopamine is messed up, and our fight or flight is messed up with epinephrine and norepinephrine, and we're just kind of short-circuited.
So I think one of the issues, or one of the drivers for the commonality of anxiety issues, especially in our clients, is that there's a tendency to try to understand, to make sense of these losses, these deaths of despair, that as I like to call them, the losses to suicide or substance abuse. And we can get lost in the whys, trying to understand, trying to make sense of something that we'll never be able to comprehend. And that builds up then into a sense that we just can't possibly understand the world around us. It I think triggers a fear mechanism and manifests as anxiety. In fact, it's not at all unusual for our clients to talk about having what they will refer to as anxiety attacks, where they're essentially just overwhelmed with anxiety. What is it that produces that intense reaction?
Protection in the end. It's our flight mechanism, and we get a short circuit, so we just go spinning into that thought, and everything brings it on. Our sense of smell brings it on, our sense of sight, something out of the corner of our eye, anything that's in our mind that is just in a perpetuation of that. And a lot of that is in that post-traumatic stress scenario where the brain keeps understanding that there's danger, and it has a problem with the loop system.
When we are vulnerable to anxiety and we encounter these triggers, the things that may trigger what some of us refer to as a grief burst, or could ultimately lead into an anxiety attack where essentially it's so overwhelming that people just shut down. This seems like another opportunity to bring our old friend breathing back into play and to try to move out of that fight or flight mindset again, and to try to find a calm place where we can essentially process what we're going through without having it overwhelm us. How would that work?
Well, I think the first step in it is to be ready with practice a little bit before this episode hits, and to be able to just stop for a minute and expand your abdomen. Because in the abdomen, if the abdomen is in a calm place, then the neurotransmitters have a chance. If they're all short-wired and the gut is just so raw at this point, then sometimes maybe some warm water, just to give something into the gut just to calm it.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes having some kind of a fat of some kind, if avocado is enjoyable, some kind of a bite, just a bite. Because if you bring in oils at all, and sometimes under the idea of oils, things like frankincense is one of the best oil in the world, and it doesn't mean you have to drink it. You can just put it as a smell, or
Mm-hmm.
sometimes lavender works. Sometimes these things that kind of trigger and work through the nose, which is one of the cranial nerves, of course, the smell, and then helps to calm the gut. Anything that can take a trigger that helps with that. And then the breath. So if the breath can calm that GI system that's in a knot all the time and just get that to expand, it might be helpful.
So even more reason to change breathing practice to be in and out through your nose, because you have the opportunity to take advantage of those
hormones,
stimuli. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, from frankincense or whatever other scent and I know, when we talk about triggers, sometimes the most impactful triggers that people encounter are smell based. They take you back to that relationship or a certain time, positive or negative, and they're just so powerful. It seems like it opens up. It's interesting though, it's the whole discussion about breathing by moving your diaphragm or moving your gut in and out makes more sense now, because that's where all these neurotransmitters are being produced, and so it's
all connected. It's amazing.
Close coupled. Yeah, it's very interesting.
Very interesting. And so little things that you can, if you understand that that's the thing, you can do small little tiny pieces that would kind of break a cycle. In the wild, mammals will often, after a big scare, animals will often chew on grass. Not that I'm asking you to go out and chew on your backyard, but you may want to find a way that you can have a carrot.
Yeah.
And dip it in butter while you're at it, because that'll build your neurotransmitters, because it'll build the fat in your body that you need. And just a bite. There's some studies that said if we acted like that and we chewed, let's say, go ahead and have something to eat, but chew 10 times. Don't just swallow it right away. Chew, 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 and then put it on the other side of your mouth and chew, 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 and then swallow it, and then have some water and some warm water and maybe some lemon water and maybe some kind of an oil that tastes good to you.
Mm-hmm.
and that changes everything. It changes everything because you're allowing that gut to go, oh, I've got a nice assignment to do, and it can help regulate some of those neurotransmitters. Fat always regulates the brain.
And it's also something that you can pull within your span of control.
Right.
So rather than getting lost in feelings of being out of control and the anxiety that produces, at least it sounds like it would be one small piece that you can
in a conscious way
control.
It's
right.
a conscious way. So that's one thing that can work for it. What's really important too is not to feed with candy and sugar. Sugar reacts in the gut to cause an inflammatory process, and then you go backwards with that. So it has to be something that you would have somewhat close to nature. If it's a carrot or celery, if that's all you can do, or something that you kind of have at ready, that this is going to be chewed many times and swallow. It helps the brain to kind of regulate all those other cranial nerves. And
so chocolate's not a good answer.
Probably, well, it's a great answer, but when there's just so much stuff in chocolate these days that I would just say it's not a bad answer, but it isn't going to help in that fast moment. That's going to be further on that you can say, okay, that's something that I can do that way. And then after that, if you imagine that you just do whatever it takes to stretch that abdomen so that it has the whole GI system is able to kind of work through it instead of being hunkered down.
Mm-hmm.
So in yoga, they use a stretching mechanism that's called Cobra. And Cobra is laying flat on your abdomen, and then you put your hands at about your shoulder area, and then you lift up, and you keep lifting up and keep looking higher, and make your eyeballs go way up to the top as far as they can go. That works on the optic, it works on the vasovagal, that works on the vagal, and it works on the phrenic nerve, all of them, to stretch everybody. And everybody stretched makes everybody in here to calm down.
And
breathe
certainly changes your breathing patterns.
And you need to breathe through your nose while you're doing it, in and out.
And
you keep breathing. Don't hold your breath. You just look way, way, way up high.
So, the neurotransmitters that you talked about, some of them sound very familiar as, I guess, I don't know if the prescription drugs are meant to stimulate those things or to duplicate their impact.
Modulate them, yeah.
But what's the impact of those kinds of drugs? Is it less beneficial than being able to stimulate your body naturally to produce?
Well, the medications that we're talking about are SSRIs like Paxil, Prozac, Zoloft.
Mm-hmm.
They work because that which the gut isn't allowing to get to the brain, it helps get to the brain.
Right.
I mean, they work. They kind of dull things out a lot, and I think in the end they find that it kind of slows the processing a little bit.
Yeah.
And you can do better if you don't need them, but sometimes you need them, and that's not always. I'm not always opposed to that idea.
Okay.
Dopamine is one of the more common dopamines is Wellbutrin.
Right.
And that's used for that down depression. You just can't get out of the dirt, and not always is that a bad thing. But if we understand that what's happening in our gut and the microbiome is all messed up in there, and that if we ate really clean and got away from the things like the sugars and the breads and things like that for a while, and ate some vegetables, we would come a long way, and fat. We'd come a long way to being able to do that naturally without having a lot of medicine.
So we have learned about the systemic impact that proper breathing can have, and it's interesting to learn more about other systems in the body that interact with that process that can contribute to our ability to manage the physical impacts of our grief. Mm-hmm. Because it's so pervasive. I mean, I guess, it's important for us to realize that, we are a whole, that, we can't separate what's happening in our brain from what happens to the rest of our bodies. And, and things like conscious breathing and being prepared to deal with issues like anxiety when it arises, be able to recognize it at an early enough stage to be able to do something about it. really that it's a powerful combination.
It is, and I think in the end, it actually helps you heal, because if you can get control over all these things that are going on with your physical, mental, emotional, everything about you, then you have gained access to healing in that way.
Uh-huh.
I just think that's how it works.
Well, I think we're gaining some insights into what makes grief so challenging, especially the kinds of intense grief that we deal with, and really understanding systemically how our bodies react to it, and systemically how we can effectively start to address that and to move towards healing.
Yep. And I think it's a step by step, and you still can process things, but if you give your body a chance to back up a little bit and take a hold for a minute, then we're able to process even more clearly.
Yeah, and I think it's important for all of us to recognize that sometimes the challenge goes beyond what we can do by ourselves with just natural approaches, but there's a tremendous amount that we can achieve, and if we're all armed with that skill set, then we can at least know that if ultimately we have to rely on some sort of medication as a supplement to those efforts, we've done what we can, and we've got a skill set that makes that hopefully not be something that we rely on indefinitely, but can move on to.
And help us also get through.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this perspective.